Tapping in.
Are we live?
When a young Black person becomes successful, a lot of people get to eat. And it's a lot of families that get fed off of that. In some ways, in this country, because the disparity is makes wealth so rare that we have a certain way of spreading it, right? And it's really unfortunate when somebody who feeds a lot of families uh, is no longer able to do that. So with that in mind, uh, we're gonna have a conversation about Young Thug's label YSL, the situation that they're experiencing, but also a broader conversation about the way hip hop is criminalized, the way that the relationship between hip hop and the police in a much broader sense. Um, but whenever somebody is fighting the prospect of being, you know, embroiled in the mass incarceration system, um, that sucks. And so hold your head to Thug, Gunna, the rest of YSL.
I'm glad you introduced it that way, because a lot of people are affected by this. You know, this is Thug's favorite artist. We know our producer specifically said, "Man, my week has been messed up because of what's happening." So the hip hop community is impacted by it. So for you to open up that way, I think is appropriate. I'm asking you to check your mic settings. In the meantime, I think there might be, just make sure your mic is working. All right. So specifically, if we are just giving the people a background, Young Thug and Gunna were arrested last week. It was a 88-page indictment. They named 30 of the YSL members, and they said that this was from a case that was trialing as far back as 2013. They were indicted under the RICO Act, which stands for essentially just like racketeer influence and corrupt organization. It was the law that was started way back to essentially capture mobsters. You know, it was the law that was introduced to capture mobsters.
Yeah, definitely designed for organizations where the power structure keeps certain people at the top from being touched by law enforcement, because they're, I guess, puppeteering a whole bunch of crimes, right? It's unfortunate and really ironic in some ways to see it be turned back against groups like YSL, with like the double layering of like, oh, they're a gang now, right? Like I never thought, the only thing I got YSL confused with was the clothing brand. You feel me? Like as a record label, I never thought of them as a gang. I never, and for that to be the understanding in the culture, for that to be the, it feels like part of this is a product of success for certain artists. It doesn't feel like there's parity to hold other artists outside of hip hop accountable for their lyrics in the same way.
Well, you're right, and there has been a long history of the hip hop police, you know, stemming way far back from Public Enemy days, and it's not even like a myth or a conspiracy anymore. They are police that are specifically targeting hip hop groups, and you've seen this happen to Bobby Shmurda. There's something that's been happening a lot more in New York, actually, which is what makes this particular case stand out even more, is that that's not necessarily the same type of indictments that you'd see in like your Atlantas. This is usually a New York thing. Casanova, Shmurdas, Tekashi was a RICO, 22 G's, that's a RICO. You know, they really are locking people up like that. So it's different in that way. and also you see the Atlanta mayor saying that that's exactly what they want to do. And so when you look at how long they've just been allowing them to operate since 2013, they say that wiretaps, they say that whatever, it gets prickly. And so their situation is actually quite serious. There is no way to sugarcoat it. People don't usually make it out of a RICO like that. Time will almost undoubtedly be served just based on the conviction rate of the DA when it comes to a RICO case. You're talking a 99% conviction rate, meaning they'll wait 2013, 9 years to build a case. And that's essentially what they have unfolding over here.
Yeah, it's been a long time. They have audio recordings from a minute back, but it's actually Georgia State that's conducting the RICO investigation. So typically, when you think of that 99% conviction rate, you're thinking of the government, of the federal government. When the feds come after you, they typically got you. Um, from what I understand, a lot of times when state comes after you, uh, there's often enough evidence for a federal investigation. And sometimes the state investigation, which may not have the same conviction rate, can drain you of your funds in advance of a federal indictment, right? So it's a really it's a really tough situation. And to me, I guess the bottom line for me is that it definitely feels like predatory. Uh, I think it feels it's there's so many layers at which artists like get messed over, from the label to actually having to come from the circumstances that they come to, and then to be particularly targeted by groups of police, right? You named a whole bunch of RICO investigations that we've seen in hip hop. DJ Drama, who prior to his RICO investigation had no prior indictments, right, was the subject of a RICO investigation for making mixtapes, right? Like literally for making mixtapes, right? They raided his property and seized nothing but mixtapes. Like, look at what people are getting arrested over and facing life in prison over. Now, there are some serious allegations in the midst of this indictment, and what RICO means is that any crime they can prove happened or that anybody within the investigation was a party to, uh, anybody within that party can be held liable for that crime, right? So when you take 28 individuals, right, surrounding two individuals that are very successful, and investigate 28 individuals to see if you can find any crimes that you can hold that entire group accountable for. Um, and it's a group like YSL, which has what I know for sure is a track record of helping people and feeding people and giving back, which we've seen a lot of come out in the midst of this, which might be the only silver lining. But man,
Well, you also, like you said, helping people and giving stuff back is something that both these gentlemen do at large in their communities. Both have a profound presence in their support for their cities. Gunna created a store where I think it's families of single household families can go in there and do groceries nearly free. Uh, Planning a development for a whole almost community within Atlanta that would subscribe to that model. So, and Doug was also very, very active in helping school kids and all that type of thing. So you're right. These are people that do feed a lot of other people around them. So one of the main things that these two particular rappers are going to get indicted upon is their lyrics. So they're using their lyrics in from their songs and their social media specifically to be able to build this case around them. And there's some quite damning things that have been said that could infer into cases that actually happen. So when you say it's predatory, it is predatory. But also at the same time, if the allegations are true, these are also cases where somebody else was injured, murdered, livelihood put at risk. There are other people who are on the other spectrum of the adverse effects that are alleged to be true. So it's a predatory for sure, but also if you are carrying out what you're doing from 2013 till now rapping about it, putting it into tweets and being overt about it, then it's it's obvious that that's what happens. And you see, and we're not taking this on, we're not like, I don't want to like put this specifically on these gents, but you had the conversation that Wallow from the $1 million Worth of Game podcast, speaking to Young Thug, and very poignantly and very specifically, was saying like, "Hey, yo, this is how this ends." And you've seen that happen time and time again with different OGs telling the younger up and coming folks like, "Hey, yo, this is what's gonna happen," calling it to a T. Fat Joe did the same thing with Takashi. It was to a T, almost in the even almost in the time difference and when they did the interviews and how quickly it is that they got caught. All to say, uh, all to say, yeah, it's unfortunate that that's the case, but I specifically do not agree with them utilizing rap lyrics and tweets and social media to indict the gentleman, specifically the lyrics. I don't agree with that at all.
Yeah, I agree. I think the issue is the systemic, is the ways in which we've created specific ways to go after these groups of people. I think it's messed up, and as we see a quote from Metro Boomin, using song lyrics to indict folks is lame and a joke. These same lyrics have made billions for these corporations over the past decade. I'm waiting now to see who's going to step up and use these same resources. Now the coin has turned. It's restricting one of the only ways that folks have managed to navigate the system as it's constructed for them. I think is just particularly predatory. And I want to acknowledge the folks that, when street shit happens, I trust me, I know that hurts people. Trust me, I know that people feel that, and that has deep implications for the communities that have to deal with that on the ground, and not just in song lyrics, right? But when you I think when you have an opportunity, you have to separate yourself from that. You have to do that, and that's an easy thing to say, but it's a very difficult thing to do, right? When you come from a neighborhood, a community, a set of circumstances that is systemically built to keep you within that neighborhood, that community, that set of circumstances, geographically, in terms of income, socially, then even the few people that have an opportunity to break out of that is a monumental accomplishment. But to be able to separate yourself completely from that entire group of people in a lifestyle is damn difficult, right? And so when you take a group of 28 people, which is what you're saying, like when you take the way that they're approaching this, when you take a group of 28 people and say any crime that any of them have done are attributed to all, I think you're exposing yourself for being more concerned with locking these people up than you are with actually preventing anything, than you are with creating a system where none of what you're alleging happened is necessary or occurs in these communities.
That's why they'll stem out a case for 9 years, 10 years. In this particular case, almost 10 years worth of evidence, because there are many points in that 10 years where they could have stopped it, where they could have really stepped in and changed the course of how that goes. But you're right. That's the predatory nature of the system, is that they really want to let you fully incriminate yourself, even if it's at the cost of other people's livelihoods or whatever the case is, and then they'll step in there. But specifically on how they would utilize, like the Metro Boomin quote over here, rap lyrics, Jay Z, Meek Mill, Big Sean, Fat Joe, a few other rappers got together to push what is known as the Rap Music on Trial bill, which they want to be let into a state law, which essentially would make it unable for the court to use rap lyrics against artists in court cases, which is something we're seeing an increasing rate of.
This is why it's important to pay attention to stuff like that. And it's purposefully boring. Legislation and bills and all of that stuff is purposefully made boring, right? Purposefully made difficult to interpret. But that's why it's important to pay attention to stuff like this. It was like 30 episodes ago. We did that show. We talked about in Maryland the first time that they set the precedent where rap lyrics were included to indict somebody, right? And it's a dangerous precedent to set, and I'm glad to see that there are active individuals like Hove and Meek that are addressing that. Like from their point of status, there's actually a Senate bill on that on the floor. And yeah, man, nobody wants to read an entire Senate bill. You ain't got to read the entire bill necessarily, but understand how this stuff can actually affect real life situations. These are real people that are going to be locked up behind this, behind the art that they've created, behind making observations, behind trying to use what they see around them, the situations that they've been put into to elevate themselves and to do something positive, really. So where does it end, and how much are we gonna start? How where does this bleed super deep into the censorship conversation?
The messed up thing about it too is that the best type of art is vulnerable art. Is to limit to put a limit on expression because you're in fear that could potentially be used against you in court is a ridiculous thing to put on art. It's unfair. Like Metro Boomin says here, there are corporations that are making billions and billions off of this. You know, you would think they would be the first ones to jump out to be able to protect the artist's rights. So you're right. Shout out to Hove and the work that they're doing over there. Hove really is Batman.
Word. I mean, but
Bruce Wayne.
that's the nature of this, of really doing the work, is like your name is going to pop up if you really, and it's going to pop up early, right? Connected to the things that really matter if you're paying attention. So that's all, man. Not to be too preachy, not to, it's a heavy situation. Hold your head to everybody involved, but it's just pay attention, man. This stuff matters. People get caught up in it, swept up in it. Sucks.